There's a quiet truth almost no one wants to face. No one breaks down in a single moment. The mind doesn't snap overnight. It cracks slowly from the inside across countless sleepless nights, endless moments of pretending to be fine, and every time you swallow your tears until one day you can no longer tell where the world ends and where you begin. Maybe you've sat in a familiar room, staring at everything around you, and suddenly it all feels strangely foreign, just slightly off, but enough to make your chest tighten and fear your own thoughts. The people the world calls crazy are often the ones who have lived in silence for far too long. They weren't born broken. As children, they were just like everyone else, believing that adults were trustworthy, thinking their home was safe, and believing that if they were sad, someone would ask, and if they were scared, someone would hold them. But very early on, they learned something brutal. Their feelings had nowhere to go. In that house, adults could yell, slam doors, go silent for hours, drop words sharp enough to cut, and then act like nothing happened the next day. No explanations, no apologies, no acknowledgement that something was wrong. And so the child quietly concluded, maybe the problem is me. If they were nicer, quieter, less needy, maybe the chaos would soften. So they began to shrink their voice, shrink their presence, shrink every desire they ever had. They learned to read the room before they even stepped inside it. They listened for tones, watched every expression, scanned every gesture just to predict whether the night would be peaceful or full of storms. They stopped trusting their own feelings. They trusted only the signals they needed to decode to survive. Years later, that child grows into an adult everyone praises as calm, mature, and so understanding. They become the person others run to when tired, when overwhelmed, when they need someone who won't let things fall apart. They sit quietly, never argue, never escalate, always soothing, always softening. But no one realizes that their calm is not a personality trait. It's a survival reflex. No one knows that every hint of tension makes their body tighten just like it did years ago, waiting for a sudden, unreasonable explosion. They move through their youth with a mind running faster than their body. The world outside may be peaceful, but inside it's constantly alert. Be careful. Don't mess up. Don't upset anyone. Don't let anyone leave. They enter relationships already preparing for loss. A slow reply, a missed call, a quiet day, things that mean nothing to others can ignite an old storm inside them. Not because those moments matter that much, but because they hit the same wound, the days they were tiny, calling someone in their mind while no one turned back. When you've never been taught that your feelings are valid, you grow up doubting everything inside you. When your heart hurts, you tell yourself you're too sensitive. When something goes wrong, you assume it's your fault. When someone pulls away, you don't ask why. You conclude you did something wrong. And slowly you stop being someone who lives and become someone who merely endures. But no nervous system can endure forever. At some point, the body begins to speak. First, it's the sleep, trouble falling asleep, waking suddenly, jolting awake in the middle of the night because of a nameless sense of danger. Then comes the eating, no appetite, or eating mechanically as if completing an assignment. Then the breath, short, tight, shallow, as though something heavy is sitting in your chest that you can't name. You start the day already tired, even though you barely did anything the night before. The mind never shuts off. It runs endlessly, even when you beg it to stop for just a moment. At this stage, people around you still think you're bishorne or maeman. You still go to work, still behave appropriately, smile, and say all the reasonable things, but inside your head, things have already begun to tilt. A simple sentence makes you overthink. A fleeting expression makes you sit for an hour in analysis. A single unanswered text pulls you straight back to childhood, back to a place where silence was never peace, only the warning of an approaching storm. And when the brain is overloaded, it does the only thing it knows to protect you. It tries to create meaning out of everything. It links unrelated events, it detects signals where none exist, and it believes everything around you is somehow pointing at you. Not because you're imagining things, but because you once lived in a place where every tiny detail could be a warning sign. When you've had to decode footsteps on the stairs just to know whether the night would be safe, you will continue decoding harmless things long after. The mind begins talking to itself. You throw out a thought, and another voice immediately argues back. You try to reassure yourself, but another voice whispers, "Don't believe it. Don't relax. Don't let yourself get hurt again." You sit in the middle of the room, yet feel like you're standing on the edge of a cliff. Part of you knows you're exaggerating. Another part is convinced you're in real danger. You're no longer sure who you are among all the voices. The world calls this stage instability, disorder, a mental problem. But look closely. This is not the beginning. It is the culmination. The culmination of every night a child wasn't held when they were afraid. The culmination of every time adults did wrong but forced the child to stay silent. The culmination of every swallowed sob, every moment they told themselves they were too sensitive, too dramatic, too weak. Some people at this point begin seeing and hearing things others don't, not because they're possessed or crazy, but because their mind is trying to build a bridge between the past and the present. It drags buried memories to the surface in distorted forms. Dreams, hallucinations, the sense of being watched, the feeling someone is talking about you. It is desperately trying to retell a story they were once forced to silence. When it can't use language, it uses images, sounds, instincts so sharp they hurt. From the outside, you see someone who is no longer themselves. From the inside, it is a soul pushed to the final edge of endurance. They no longer have the strength to keep everything intact. When you hold up your arms too long, eventually they must fall. When you hold a wall too long, eventually it must crack. Collapse is not the mind betraying you. It is the mind finally telling the truth. I cannot keep going like this anymore. The painful truth is that people only start paying attention when someone has already reached this breaking point. A lifetime of silence earns no questions, but the moment they start shaking, spiraling, losing sleep, panicking, unable to contain their thoughts, that's when the world says, something's wrong. Yet almost no one asks, how long did you have to walk alone to end up here? Healing for people like this is never glamorous. It doesn't come from phrases like, stay positive, or you'll be fine. It begins with something much smaller, much quieter. The first time they tell the truth. Not to the world, maybe whispered to someone they trust, maybe scribbled onto a page, maybe said to their own reflection, I'm tired, I'm scared, I've held too much for too long. And when that truth is acknowledged, even if only by themselves, something subtle shifts. They don't suddenly feel better. They don't magically stop unraveling, but the shame wrapped around their breakdown loosens just a little. Instead of thinking, I'm weak, I'm broken, I deserve this, they begin to recognize, no one deserves to grow up in fear, not even me. From there, the journey home is slow. They start seeing their mind not as an enemy, but as something that has endured far too much. They begin noticing the small signals, when they're overwhelmed, when they need to rest, when they're reacting to a memory instead of the moment. They practice saying no to situations that make their hands shake. They learn to step out of conversations that feel like being pulled back into the old house of their childhood. And through this, the goal is not to go back to who they were, because the before was the life that pushed them to the edge. The real victory is that this time, they're not abandoning themselves. When panic hits, they no longer call themselves crazy. When exhaustion returns, they stop forcing themselves to push through it. When old memories surface, they don't command themselves to move on, but let the pain rise for a moment, then gently lay it down. One day, not special, just an ordinary morning, they wake up and notice their head feels a little less heavy. The thoughts are still there, the echoes still hum, the old wounds ache, but it's quieter. They sit up, hear the sound of their own breathing, and realize, I'm still here. Not perfect, not fully healed, but no longer falling through the dark the way they once did. Maybe no one celebrates that moment. No one sees it. No one understands that to breathe like this again, they survived nights that felt like the end. But them all, no. Their body knows. Oh, their mind knows. Their soul knows. And perhaps the most important truth they learn is this: they were never crazy. At least not in the way people cruelly use the word. They were simply children forced to grow in conditions no child should ever endure. They were adults carrying a nervous system trained too long in war, confused when finally stepping into peace. They were human beings who stayed silent for so long that when the truth finally spilled out, it looked like chaos. And if you recognize yourself in this story, what you need is not someone telling you to stop being crazy, but someone who can say, I believe you. There is a reason for what you feel. You're not broken. You've just lived too long without being seen. And if no one has ever said that to you before, then let this stay with you. You are not losing your mind. You were simply alone with your fear for far too long. And now, little by little, you are learning how to return to a version of yourself that no longer has to live in that silence.